I'd like to start with a reminder that this conference is being held on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present and Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. Now, do any of you find this slide a bit hard to read? Second question, did any of you notice the typos? In case you didn't, this is where they are. So the M of them is actually an RN, the O of other is actually a C, and the second I of communities is actually an L. Now, look at what happens if we change the typographic settings. With this font and these colors, you should find the text much easier to read, and hopefully the typos should also be easier to detect. Let's just fix the typos there. So the thing that I hope you'll take away from this demonstration is that typographic accessibility matters for everyone. It's not just for people with low vision or for older users. It's something that we need to think about when doing visual design for all audiences. So I'd like to talk about three principles for making typographic design accessible. Firstly, choose a legible font. Secondly, use good spacing to give the letters and words room to breathe. And thirdly, to use contrasting colors. So what's legibility? So the unifying principle of legibility is that basically if you squint at the words, the letters should be easily recognizable and distinct from each other. So a good way of to simulate squinting is to just blur the text. So in the left column, you can see that if you blur the words, the R and the N blur together into an M. The C doesn't look different enough from an O, and the I and the L look too similar to each other. Whereas in the more legible font on the right, you can see that the letters are still quite distinct from each other. So there are certain guidelines when it comes to picking a legible font. The first, most obvious one is that if your font is too small, it's not going to be legible. That doesn't require much explanation. But something you might not know is that the apparent size of a font has to do with more than just its point size. So the two fonts on this slide are actually at the same point size, but as I'm sure you can see, the font on the right looks bigger. And the reason for that is that it has a higher X height. So if you compare the heights of the uppercase H, they're more or less the same. But if you look at the lowercase letters, especially the ones without ascenders or descenders, like the A or the N, the letters in the font on the right are clearly larger, and you can see that this also makes them more distinct and easier to read in the blurred versions below. So yeah, so the first thing to pay attention to is X height. And another important factor that affects legibility is stroke contrast. That is the difference between thick and thin strokes. So the font on the left has high stroke contrast. You can see the horizontal strokes are thinner than the vertical strokes, whereas the one on the right has low stroke contrast. And if you look at the blurred versions, in the one on the left, the thin strokes pretty much disappear, and that makes the makes the letter shapes hard to recognize. Whereas on the right, the letter forms are generally well preserved. The other thing to pay attention to is letter shapes that are tend to be similar to each other and tend to be confused among each other. For example, capital I, lowercase I, and lowercase l. Generally in so-called geometric fonts, these tend to be too similar to each other and too easily confused. This also tends to happen with 0 and uppercase O, as well as certain lowercase letters with round shapes like lowercase c, lowercase o, that kind of thing. So generally what you want to look for is a font where these easily confused letters have distinct shapes. Typically this means capital I with horizontal strokes on the top and bottom, lowercase l with the tail, a two-story A, as it's called, and a lowercase c that isn't too closed up. Now we come to spacing. Generally, you want to provide ample spacing between the letters, but not so much that the word falls apart. The reason for this becomes clear when you look at the blurred versions, that if the letters are too close to each other, they tend to crowd together and not be distinct enough. A similar principle applies to word spacing. Generally, the looser the word spacing, the easier it is to distinguish the words from each other. What's interesting is that it turns out this effect is actually stronger than the effect of letter spacing. So in the bottom example, the words are further apart than in the top example, but the letters are actually closer together. But the overall effect is to, in fact, improve the legibility. And finally, we come to color contrast. Basically, more contrast is better. Generally, you want either very dark text on a very light background or very light text on a very dark background. Should be pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so now that I've gone through these general principles, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we've been applying these principles at Sunflower AI. So Sunflower AI is providing the live captions for this talk. So you've actually been seeing examples of our design decisions in action throughout this conference. So this was our first attempt at designing live captions. We basically took our cues from YouTube. So this is just in Helvetica with a semi-transparent gray background. And you should be able to see what's wrong with this. The letters are too close to each other. The C is too similar to the O, and there's not enough contrast between the text and the background color. So in the next iteration, we did a bunch of testing and settled on this font, which is called Martel, which is a serif, has good differentiation between different letter shapes. It has a large X height, and it has some stroke contrast, but not too much. But we got some feedback from users that they wanted a sans serif typeface instead of a serif typeface. Actually, the research doesn't show any clear evidence for sans serifs being more legible than serifs or the other way around. But we decided to try out the Martel Sans font, which was developed as a companion to Martel. Except it turns out that this has the problem of capital I and lowercase l being too similar to each other. So in other words, the different letter shapes aren't distinct enough from each other. So in our most recent iteration, we've switched to a relatively new font called AR1 Sans. This was developed for augmented reality. So in fact, AR stands for augmented reality here. And this satisfies pretty much all the requirements for a highly legible typeface. It's got a large X height, low stroke contrast, well-differentiated letter forms, nice generous spacing. And on top of this, you might notice if you look very carefully that the corners have slight protrusions. This is a special feature of AR1 Sans that's designed to compensate for low-resolution displays, which is something we sometimes have to deal with for live captioning. And yeah, this is the font that you see in the live captions right now and throughout the conference. Just to summarize, these are some basic principles to follow for improving typographic accessibility. Large X height, low stroke contrast, distinct shapes for confusable letters, generous spaces between letters and even more generous spaces between words, and high contrast between text and background. Now, these principles are all backed up by scientific research. You can read more about that in the book I've shown here called Reading Letters by Sophie Beyer, who's a researcher at the Royal Danish Academy. Actually, you can download this book for free. So go, I would encourage you all to go read this book and go out and make the world typographically accessible for everyone. Thank you.